Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you're with us. You can always go to goodlifetelevision.org to check out previous interviews. There's a lot of great interviews, a lot of great stories, a lot of hope, and hopefully a lot of encouragement. The purpose of Good Life TV is really to inspire, to encourage, to empower, to honor, sometimes to educate, which is kind of what we're doing today. But we hope to be kind of a light in the darkness. And we're so glad you're with us here. GoodLifeTelevision.org. And GoodLifeTelevision.org is sponsored by the Turner Foundation here in California. The Turner Foundation has a partnership with these gentlemen, Douglas and Spencer Doman. Welcome.
Thank you.
The Turner Foundation partners with their organization, Doman International, D-O-M-A-N, international.org is their website. They help special needs children and the families of special needs children, and they help them with a roadmap on how they can best help the child be the best they can be, develop, thrive, move forward. They give them the plan, they help them, and they've helped our family, who has a special needs child, over 17 years. So we go way back. On this show, we want to specifically talk about Down syndrome. I guess the name is trisomy 21 that some people use, but I think most people know it as Down syndrome. But some of the statistics we saw that 1 in 700 babies born in the U.S. are born with Down syndrome every year. Between 1 in 1,000, around 1 in 1,000 worldwide Down syndrome every year, and we know that a lot of Down syndrome children, just to tell the truth, are aborted in the womb. And so what we want to talk about is Down syndrome in terms of these children, how you help them, and the genius, the potential that exists with so many of these kids. But talk a little bit about kind of your experience, a success story, kind of the road you've traveled with parents with a Down syndrome child.
Well, if we go into the history of it, and now we go back to the 1950s and the 1960s, when my father began his work, and their objective being that all special needs children should have the opportunity to become totally well as an objective, which was considered wild and radical then and is still considered to be the same. But now, after 30,000 families around the world, and 60 years of experience, and having graduated many children to wellness, we know, of course, that it's a reality. Well, my father taught that, and this is true for the great majority of brain injury, that the brain develops in the womb well, and something happens. It can happen in the womb, it can happen in the process of being born, it can be after birth, where a child gets a disease that actually injures the brain, or a traumatic injury, a child walks across the street and gets hit by a car. In all of these cases, it all started with a good brain that got injured. And even my father fell into the trap. There are these children where the quality of their brain right from the get-go isn't good enough. And when families came to us and we diagnosed them as being brain injured and then began them on a program of brain growth and development, that didn't include the Down syndrome children, who were considered that right from the time of conception, the quality of their brains was not normal. Well, my father was wrong in that regard, because yes, there is a genetic difference in the brain, but otherwise the brains of Down syndrome children are very much like everybody else's. And so my father, after being given a hard time, even by members of his own medical staff, decided, why not give these children a chance and see what happens. Clearly they have a neurological problem, clearly that's in the brain. And so back in the 1960s, we began to treat these children, and we were shocked by how well and quickly they developed. And we realized that we were wrong, that despite the genetic problem these children have, they had great potential. And then we began to graduate these children to wellness. And now the list is long. I mean, the first kid that comes to mind, a child from Italy, Francesco, when we met him as a 3-year-old, was diagnosed as being moderately or severely brain injured. Francesco followed our program. He was an early reader.
And Francesco had Down syndrome.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
And, by the time he was 6, parents said he's ready to go to school. And, we're very conservative about the children we graduate. We want to say this kid is well, he's always going to be well. And so we don't want to let a kid go unless we feel 100%. The parents said, no, he's ready. And they stopped the program and put him into school. And he did well in elementary school. And he did very well in middle school and high school. And he did very well in college. And then he went to graduate school and got his degree in economics. Now, I don't know about you, Dean, but I would never have dared to take a course in economics unless I was forced to.
Gives me the sweats.
And so, Francesco, of course, has a job. Now he takes time to take care of his grandchildren. He's, I think, a part of a rowing team. A wonderful young man and a success. And of course, we've seen that story, not kids always going to graduate school, right. But we have kids, of course, that have gone to college. I think we've had one Down syndrome girl in Brazil who also has gone to graduate school. And of course, families, children that have gotten married, families run businesses. They have incredible potential, these children.
Down syndrome, it doesn't affect mobility as much, does it? That kind of a brain injury?
It depends on the child, because even with a single genetic diagnosis like Down syndrome, there's actually a great amount of variability amongst the kids who have it. Okay. Some have, much more considerable neurological issues than others. So some might have mild speech and learning difficulties, and some might have very severe mobility and speech problems. And so it completely depends on the child. But all of them can benefit with the program. And one of the worst things about getting a genetic diagnosis like Down syndrome for parents is that very often, like in the example of Down syndrome, parents are often told very soon after birth, or sometimes even before birth, with amniocentesis test. But the problem is not just the diagnosis, but the advice that parents are given along with it, right? So very often they'll be told, your child has Down syndrome, your child will never live a normal life, your child will never be successful in school. So just kind of prepare your child for a life of not being able to go very far. And the issue with that is, first of all, those parents aren't being given any kind of solutions, which is what we try to do with the Doman method. But another part of the problem is that because parents are being given a ceiling, right, to their child, they're basically being told, your child will never achieve this. Ceiling. A false ceiling,
exactly.
Right? I like that. I'm going to use that from now on. A false ceiling. The issue is that parents, imagine for a second, if we were going to do something truly evil, right? And a parent gave birth to a child who was completely healthy. But we told that parent, your child is going to have lifelong intellectual and academic problems. Don't bother, trying to, your kid will never succeed in school. Don't stimulate them. Don't, what's the point? The parents are going to interact with that child in a completely different way. The adults are going to interact with them in a completely different way. And that is going to put a false ceiling on that child, and that's very destructive.
And I'll give you a real life example of the opposite of that. When I was in university, I was in a program in Colombia in South America. And I went to visit the people of the Chocó. These people live on the Pacific side of Colombia. And many originally came from Africa and then got into that part of Colombia to have a society where they could be free and not be enslaved. And now this has gone, you know, for generations. So I visited these people and I saw the first African American Down syndrome child that I'd ever seen. And, you know, I recognized the child by the features that the child had. And in this native society, they just considered him like the other kids. You know, he looked a little different, but that's it. You're a kid, you do all the things you're supposed to do. So here, in this not modern, industrialized society, this child had been given much more opportunity, just like an average child, and of course, the child developed because that was expected of him.
Isn't that just amazing? It's the labels. The labels
Yes.
kill. And, you know, it's, I mean, I'm not going to get too spiritual on you, but I will pass an offering plate at the end of this segment. But, you know, there's something about naming. You know,
Yes.
if that doctor does the amniocentesis and comes to the parent and says, you know, we have a wonderful child made in the image of God with unlimited potential, and he happens to have this little Down syndrome deal, then they're probably not going to abort. I mean, you know, it's a different way of thinking about. I mean, these when we talk about the unlimited potential, they're made in the image of God, just like all the rest of us, with gifts and a purpose. You
Yes.
know, I mean, our daughter, who had 2/3 of her brain wiped out with a stroke, has changed our life, transformed our family, changed everything. And I mean, and it's been hard. I mean, you guys know,
Yes.
you made it hard.
Yeah.
It's been hard, but it's transformative. But it's almost like the labels, the way we see these kids is so impactful for how they actually end up. It's almost like you walk into what you're called. You know, if you say that
Yes.
I'm never gonna, then I'm gonna walk into that. If you call up, I mean, you know, Jesus called this one disciple of his the Rock, who was the most unstable guy in the group. And guess what? That was the church was built on him. He became that.
Yeah.
You know, and so I just think how we talk about it's so important. Those labels.
Absolutely. And you know, so in the online Doman method course, in one of my lectures to the parents, I say to them, you know, the program you're about to embark on with your child, you are entering the most meaningful years of your entire life.
Yes.
They may not be the easiest,
Right.
but they will be the most meaningful years. And I think that parents, they understand that. They know that in their heart, you know. But I agree with you. I think the way that we talk about special needs, if the world just stopped talking about these kids, like they've got, you know, my grandfather used to say, you know, this is a child with a brain injury. This isn't a brain injury who happens to be a child.
Right.
Like, let's look at the person within.
Yes.
And for me, and I think my dad will probably agree with this, since we grew up in this environment surrounded by kids with special needs, right? My grandparents worked in this clinic. I was there as a kid. I tell parents this, and I think maybe it even makes me sound cold, but I can honestly say I've never met a child with special needs that I felt sorry for. Like, I never felt sorry for them because I grew up around them. They were like brothers and sisters. But I've met many kids with special needs that I deeply respect. And respect is a very different attitude than pity.
Yes.
And so I think that many people feel pity toward kids with special needs. It's like, oh, I feel sorry for that individual. But the truth is that feeling sorry for someone that alone is not going to uplift them.
Right.
But respecting someone truly for who they are, that's much more uplifting, I think.
Who they are and who they could be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so so much has to do with viewpoint, and 80%. There are 80% less Down syndrome children born in the United States today as there were 20 years ago. And obviously, every parent has to make their decision. But when you see a child that comes to us, not able to move at 12 months of age, and that same child at the age of 3 is walking and reading children's books independently, which you can see on our YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're not making this up, and it's common. If we can get a Down syndrome child as a baby, 12 months, 14 months, 18 months, we can often get that child reading independently, which is a function of the cortex, the highest part of the brain, the part of the brain responsible for human intelligence, by the age of 3, where they're doing things that average 6-year-olds can't do. If anything proves the intelligence of these children, and to not give them that opportunity is amazing. Now, the advantage that they have, which is, this current society turned upside down, is they can be diagnosed while they're in utero. Right. And we have mothers, and these mothers are super angels, in my opinion, who have known that their child was a Down syndrome child, and they have taken our online course, are fully prepared with a physical, cognitive, nutritional, and respiratory program when the child is born, right from the first day of life, the get-go, and that's just beautiful.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, and so the youngest child on our program to ever receive a writing victory, so it means that she started writing completely independently. She's 4 years old. So the average kid usually learns to write at school at 6, but this girl was writing independently at 4, and she had Down syndrome. So it's very typical for our kids to read in multiple languages. Again, people, if they go to our Facebook page, they can. Or YouTube page, they can watch videos of our kids doing these things. And it's just a funny little story. So a family was telling me that they have a child with Down syndrome who's been on our program and reads at age 4 and does all kinds of amazing things. And apparently the family across the street, they have a tiny kid, like 5 or 6 years old, and they said, the family across the street, the parents asked the child, the girl across the street, she has Down syndrome. Do you know what Down syndrome is? And the 5-year-old girl said, oh yeah, Down syndrome means you can read when you're really young. So she had just made the assumption, she reads when she's young. They say she has Down syndrome. That's what Down syndrome is. So
that's a great dream, to have out there, that 5-10 years down the line, that's what known, that Down syndrome kids are kids that are known to read really young.
Yeah, when we came to see you 17 years ago, we started this road. Our daughter had a stroke in the womb, as I mentioned, and we came, and one of the things you taught us was about languages. Okay, so we have this cerebral palsy but stroke victim who wasn't developing and all these issues, but the last thing on my mind was a second language. Like we had some bigger fish to fry but we took it to heart and we implemented it. And then we had a person who helped us with this treatment program named Carla. She's watching. Most wonderful person ever. And we just told her, just talk Spanish to Ella Claire. And Ella Claire's fluent, and Spanish is the highlight of her life, the Spanish language. This is what she loves the most, is Spanish. We pay $199 a month, and she has unlimited video classes with teachers in South America doing Spanish. And she's brilliant, and her accent's perfect. And it's given her this thing. I mean, that story reminded me of this. It's not Ella Claire. We call her the maestra, And I think that you guys just opened the door, I guess, for us and thousands of other parents to know what's possible.
Yeah, and just taking that example alone, many parents are told, don't speak to your children in multiple languages. Don't talk to your kids in multiple languages because it will confuse your child. And parents of kids with special needs are told that even more, than parents of well kids. But that's terrible advice. There's no scientific evidence to support that. Speaking to kids in multiple languages is problematic. In fact, any study that's ever been done shows that bilingualism, multilingualism is a great thing, in terms of academic performance and understanding. And
right.
So sometimes there are these, it just goes back to the whole conversation about myths that exist, really keeping kids with special needs in their, kind of keeping them in a very bad place. And once we can dispel these myths, then
right.
we realize they're capable of so much more.
That's amazing.
I think you kids told me this joke. So, what does bilingual mean?
Speaks 2 languages.
2 languages. Okay. What does trilingual mean?
3 languages.
And so, what does monolingual mean?
1 language.
And my kids would say, no, American.
Good, very good.
And so, of course, we're an international organization, so we have families all over the world, and we have a center in India, and it's expected in Indian society, as it has been for thousands of years, you're expected to speak 2, 3, 4 languages. I mean, it's
not exceptional. That's normal.
That's normal. Yeah.
If you only spoke 1 language, people would think there's something wrong with you.
Right.
Right.
And
so,
like the Swiss, everybody
yeah.
thinks, what's different about the Swiss? They speak 2, 3, 4 languages.
Wow.
And we all could if we were given the opportunity. And the more languages you speak, the easier it is to pick up a 3rd, 4th,
right.
or more language.
And for kids with language difficulties, learning multiple languages gives them more ways that they can communicate with the people around them. Because if you're limited to 1 language, things can be more difficult. But if you, for example, if you can speak English and Spanish, you now have 2 languages to choose from, right? So, and it might be easier to say a specific word in English than the translation in Spanish. So it gives you more options, and giving more options in life is a good thing.
Yeah. I don't want to generalize or stereotype, or I want to be careful with that. But I have to tell you, some of the Down syndrome kids that I've met are the most, Don is nodding over there, brilliant, joy, just the beauty, and in some cases, like the simplicity, no filter, just, and it's so refreshing, and I just think, if you're entrusted with a child of God who is made in the image of God, who happens to have this Down syndrome diagnosis, there's a reason, and it can be life-changing. And you can change the child's life by giving them the best shot, and that child's going to change your life. And that's one of the things that has happened to us, and I want to say, because I didn't hear that message when we took home our newborn special needs child. It was like, this was bad. There's nobody saying this is going to change your life. This might be one of the best things that's ever happened to you. Now, I'd probably thought they were crazy, but it'd have been a good message to hear. This is true.
And beautiful.
And beautiful. Thank you, guys. Awesome. See you next time. What a great way to close.